The wind on the coast of Maine had a voice that evening in the late 1700s, but it was a voice of sorrow. It carried the scent of rain, salt, and the silent grief of a war that had finally consumed everything. On a remote, mist-shrouded island, the ancient feud between the O'Connells and the Fitzwilliams was over. There was no victory, only the profound silence of loss. Old Maeve O'Connell, the last of her pack, lay on the cold, wet ground. The blood on her matted fur was not her own, but that of her family, her brothers, her children, her entire life, all gone. Her body was a massive wolf, but her eyes held the hollow despair of a woman who had lost her entire world. Her rage, once a fire that burned so brightly, was now a cold, smoldering ember in the pit of her soul. She had fought for a century, and for what? For nothing. Everything was gone. Her only comfort was the sight of her enemy, the last of their kind, on his knees not far away. Silas Fitzwilliam, the last elder of his family, was a man of the earth, but his power could not save the ones he loved. He was on his knees, his hand pressed to a wound that was not from a fight, but from a broken heart. He had lost everything to a war that had raged for longer than he could remember. His magic, tied to the very island they stood on, was now a quiet, sorrowful burden. He looked at the fallen matriarch, and he saw not an enemy, but a reflection of his own pain. He saw a lonely old wolf, a hollow victory in her eyes, and a deep, bottomless sorrow. In that quiet moment, with the last rays of light fading from the sky, Maeve O'Connell, in her final desperate breath, unleashed a curse not of savagery but of bitter, poetic justice. It was an act born from a century of hatred and a moment of pure, blinding loss. "By the blood of my ancestors and the sorrow of my pack," she whispered, her voice a fractured thing, "I curse you, Fitzwilliam, and all your kin. You are bound to this island. You will be its guardians, its silent slaves, protectors of its cursed spring. You will feel the weight of this land in your bones until you draw your last breath. You will never ever be free." A dark, cold magic rippled from her, washing over the exhausted Fitzwilliams, binding their very essence to the earth beneath them. The curse was not a scream but a final, mournful whisper. And as his family's fate was sealed, Silas Fitzwilliam, with his last ounce of life and will, looked at the fallen matriarch. He felt her pain, her sorrow, her deep-seated loss. And in his dying breath, a different kind of magic rose from him. It was a magic of hope, a desperate prayer against a century of hatred. "You cursed us to be bound," he whispered, his voice a ghost on the wind, "and for that you and your kin will be bound as well. Your wolf nature, the very essence of your being, will be dormant. You will walk among men, a shell of what you once were. Your strength will be gone, your power a forgotten echo. And it shall remain so until a true union, a love-born union, a love built on this very island, can break the spell." His words were a final act of grace, a quiet promise of a future that seemed impossible. The island held its breath, and a deep silence, a century of waiting, settled over the land. Chapter 1. Centuries later. The ferry to Monhegan Island was small and a little worn, a rusty boat with a salt-stained deck. For Katy, it was the last leg of a journey that had felt both impossibly long and far too short. She leaned against the railing, clutching the strap of her old canvas bag, the smell of the cold ocean air filling her lungs. Her hair, a stubborn mess of waves, whipped around her face, and a laugh escaped her lips. It was a nervous sound, a mix of excitement and the creeping fear of the unknown. For the past 3 years she had buried herself in her work, a botanist who found more comfort in the silent conversation of plants than in the loud, unpredictable chaos of people. A research grant from her university was what brought her here, to this tiny, isolated island known for its bizarre and unique flora. The grant had been a lifeline, an escape. She had packed her life into a few boxes, said a quick goodbye to her potted ferns, and left her life in the city behind without a second thought. She was ready for quiet, for soil and solitude. She looked at her hand, calloused from years of digging in the dirt. It wasn't a hand made for fancy parties or delicate work, and she was fine with that. It was a hand that understood life from the roots up. She was practical, a little messy, and she had a habit of talking to her plants when she thought no one was listening. It had been her mother who used to joke that Katy had O'Connell hands, rough but with a touch that could make anything grow. She'd never understood what that meant, but the words stuck with her. As the ferry pulled into the harbor, the island emerged from the mist like a forgotten secret. It was a place of jagged cliffs and ancient twisted pine trees. The houses, a small handful clustered by the docks, looked like they had been built to defy the wind, hunkered down and sturdy. This was a place with a history you could feel in the air, a history she was just starting to learn. She hopped off the boat, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet. Her boots made a soft thud on the wooden pier. A couple of locals eyed her from a bench, their faces a mixture of curiosity and a little suspicion. Newcomers were a rare sight on this island, and she knew she stuck out. She was wearing a city-worn rain jacket and a hopeful, slightly too wide grin. "You the botanist?" an old man asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "That's me," she replied, her grin softening. "Katie." He just nodded and went back to whittling a piece of wood. The brief conversation was a perfect example of what she had come for. A quiet kind of connection, a simple recognition without all the fussy chatter of the city. Her cabin was a short walk from the harbor, a small wooden house with a porch that looked out over the sea. It was simple and cozy, with a fireplace that smelled faintly of old smoke. She dropped her bag on the floor with a heavy thud and let out a sigh of relief. She was here. She was finally here. The only sounds were the wind and the gulls. The first few hours were a blissful blur of unpacking and exploring. She set up her workstation by the window, organizing her notebooks, magnifying glass, and a small, well-loved trowel. She even had her tiny emergency kit of a few well-meaning but often failing plant cuttings from her own garden back home. She gave them a quick pep talk and a sprinkle of water, promising them a better life on the island. "We're going to get along just fine, aren't we?" she whispered to a sad-looking succulent. The air in the cabin was cool and smelled of old wood and the sea. The feeling of being completely alone with no one to answer to was a kind of freedom she hadn't realized she'd been craving. But as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery orange and deep purple, a small, uneasy feeling settled over her. It was a prickle on the back of her neck, a strange awareness that she wasn't as alone as she thought. It was the feeling of being watched. She dismissed it as the isolation getting to her, a phantom of her city-dwelling nerves. The next day she set out to begin her work, heading toward the forest at the heart of the island. The trees here were different. They were gnarled and ancient, their branches twisted like old bones. The ground beneath her feet was soft, a thick bed of pine needles and moss. She found plants she had only ever seen in books, their leaves a strange, almost luminescent green, their flowers a delicate purple she had never seen before. She knelt down, her fingers gently touching a small fern. It felt as if it was alive in a way that was more than just biological. It felt like it had a quiet spirit of its own. Hours passed as she lost herself in her work. She took notes, sketching the intricate patterns on a mushroom cap and carefully collecting a soil sample. She was so focused on her work that she didn't hear the snap of a twig behind her, a sound that should have been impossible to miss in the quiet of the woods. When she finally looked up, she froze. A man was standing just a few feet away, leaning against a tree. He was tall, dressed in simple, practical clothes, and he was watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat a little faster. His hands were tucked in his pockets, but his body was coiled with a quiet power, like a spring about to uncoil. He had a look in his eyes that was both wary and fiercely protective, like a guardian standing over a priceless treasure. Katie scrambled to her feet, her hands covered in dirt. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you there." He didn't move and he didn't speak. He just watched her, his silence stretching the moment into something tense and a little scary. It wasn't an aggressive stare, but it was one that made it clear she was an outsider on his territory. Finally, his voice broke the silence, deep and smooth like a river stone. "You're a long way from the path." I'm a botanist," she stammered, holding up her notebook as if it were a shield. "I'm here for a study. The plants, they're amazing. They're unlike anything I've ever seen." "This is not a place for outsiders," he said, his words simple and direct, with no room for argument. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just want to study." He didn't respond, his gaze unwavering. She felt a shiver run down her spine, and she knew it wasn't from the cold. This man wasn't just a local. He was a part of the island, a living piece of its quiet, ancient history. She felt it in the air around him, a deep connection to the earth and the trees. He was a protector, and she, in her clumsy city girl way, was a threat. My name's Katie, she said, trying to lighten the mood. What's yours? He took a step back, melting into the shadows of the trees as if he were never really there. It's not a place for you, he repeated, his voice fading. And then he was gone. She stood there for a long moment, the strange tension of the encounter still hanging in the air. She looked at her notebook, at the soil in her hands. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time, not just from the trees, but from the very ground beneath her feet. She was on a magical island, and she had just met its mysterious and very guarded keeper. The feeling of him, a powerful and quiet presence, lingered in the air, a silent warning that she had entered a world far more complex than she had ever imagined. The island was beautiful, but she was starting to realize it was also dangerous. Chapter 2. The sun rose on Monhegan Island with a soft, misty light, and for Katie, it felt like the start of a new, different life. She spent her days in the quiet of the woods, a world away from the noise of the city. Her life was now a simple routine. Wake up, drink a cup of strong coffee that tasted like sea salt, and head out with her notebook and trowel. She was in her element, a world of dirt and leaves and the quiet conversation she had with herself. Her first week was a botanical dream. She found the rare purple flowers she had only ever seen in pictures. She discovered a patch of luminous moss that seemed to glow in the shaded parts of the forest. Her notebook was filling up fast, a mix of scientific notes and small, messy drawings. She was so focused on her work that the feeling of being watched, which had been so strong on her first day, became a quiet hum in the background. She was a scientist, not a character in a movie, and she was used to being alone. One afternoon she came back to her cabin after a long day of hiking. She dropped her bag on the porch, her muscles aching in a good way, and noticed a small, smooth river stone sitting right on top of her notebook. It hadn't been there when she left. He picked it up, feeling its cool weight. It was a simple, ordinary stone, but it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. A small, nervous laugh escaped her. Maybe a local had just passed by and left it there. It was a strange little gesture, but it wasn't a bad one. The next morning the feeling of being watched was back. It was stronger now, not a nervous twitch but a definite, undeniable presence. She was kneeling by a rare fern, sketching its delicate shape, when she heard the faint snap of a twig in the trees behind her. She froze, her pencil still. She knew that sound. It wasn't a bird or a small animal. It was too heavy. "Hello," she called out, her voice a little too high. "Is anyone there?" Silence. The forest was completely still. She shook her head, telling herself she was being ridiculous. "It's the isolation, Katie," she muttered to herself. "You're going crazy. Talking to plants, talking to yourself, seeing things. You're a walking cliché." She felt a little silly, but the feeling didn't go away. A couple of days later the weirdness continued. She was returning from a walk near the cliffs when she saw it. A single perfect purple flower left by the front door of her cabin. It was one of the rare ones she had been so excited to find. Her heart did a strange little flip. It was a gesture that was both kind and incredibly unsettling. Someone had been there while she was gone. Someone had been watching her. This time curiosity overpowered her unease. Who was this person? The hermit-like man she'd met on her first day? It had to be him. He had that powerful, quiet energy. He was the one who had told her this wasn't a place for outsiders. But if he wanted her to leave, why was he leaving her flowers? The next day she decided to be more observant. She packed a lunch and found a high spot on a rocky outcrop where she could see a wide swath of the forest below. She sat there for hours, pretending to read a book while her eyes scanned the treeline. She saw nothing but birds and squirrels. She was about to give up when she caught a flash of movement just at the edge of her sight. It was a tall, dark shape, moving with a fluid grace she had seen only once before. It was him. He was moving through the trees like a ghost, a silent, powerful presence. She watched him for a long moment, a mix of awe and frustration bubbling up inside her. He wasn't a threat. He was a protector. The feeling was clear, but the mystery of his actions was driving her crazy. He had to know. She stood up, her heart pounding. "Hey," she yelled. "I know you're there. Please, just talk to me for a second." The figure froze for a split second, then melted back into the shadows. He was gone. Just like that. Katie let out a frustrated sigh. She felt like she was a character in a bad comedy sketch, yelling at trees. She had to get to the bottom of this. She decided to set a trap. Not a physical trap, of course, but a little social experiment. The next morning she left her notebook on the porch table, wide open to a page with a drawing of a rare plant she had been looking for, one she had only read about. She knew she was being a little ridiculous, but she needed to know if he was really watching her. She then went for a walk in the opposite direction, keeping an eye on her cabin from a hidden spot. Nothing. She waited for an hour, 2 hours. Nothing. She felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. She was alone on an island, a grown woman playing a strange game with an invisible man. She sighed and started to head back to her cabin. But then as she rounded the corner she stopped dead in her tracks. There, on top of her notebook, was a single perfect leaf from the very plant she had been looking for. It was from a plant that only grew in the deepest, most hidden part of the forest, a place she hadn't yet been. Her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't just watching her, he was helping her. And he was doing it in a way that was completely silent and a little bit magical. The leaf was a small thing, but it was a promise. A promise that he saw her. That he knew what she was looking for. She picked up the leaf, her fingers trembling slightly. It was so simple, so quiet, and yet it was the most powerful thing she had found on the island yet. She felt a profound sense of awe and a little bit of fear. Who was this man, this silent watcher? And why did it feel like he was watching over her, even from a distance? She knew she had to find out. The mystery was no longer a curious hum in the background. It was a question, loud and clear, and she wasn't going to rest until she got an answer. Chapter 3. The quiet of the island was shattered by the angry buzz of a high-powered speedboat cutting through the harbor. Katie, who was sitting on her porch with a mug of coffee and her notebook, winced at the sound. It was an ugly, mechanical noise that felt completely out of place, like a screech in a library. She watched from a distance as a sleek, modern boat docked at the pier, looking like a piece of the city had been dropped onto the weathered wood. A man stepped onto the pier, a stark contrast to the humble islanders. He was dressed in a sharp suit that probably cost more than her entire cabin, and he carried an air of entitlement that was impossible to miss. He moved with a slick, practiced ease, his smile a little too wide, a little too perfect. He was followed by a team of people with fancy equipment and clipboards, all of them looking at the island with the cold, calculating eyes of people who saw land not as a home, but as a business opportunity. Katie watched, a knot forming in her stomach. Her first instinct was to hide, to go back to her simple life of plants and quiet solitude. But the sight of him, a man who seemed to have no respect for the silent beauty of the island, made her blood run cold. She put on her boots and walked down to the pier, her heart beating a little faster with every step. She felt ridiculous, a woman in mud-splattered hiking boots confronting a man in a perfectly tailored suit. He was talking to the old fisherman who had greeted her, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that seemed to swallow up the sound of the wind. "A pleasure to meet you, sir," the man in the suit said, a smile that didn't reach his eyes plastered on his face. "My name is Damian Mercer. We have plans for this place. Big plans. A luxury resort. A private community for people who appreciate the finer things." The old man just stared at him, his face unreadable. Katie stepped forward, her voice a little shaky. "I'm sorry, but a resort? This island is a protected habitat. The plants here are unique to this place. You can't just..." Damien turned to her, his smile not changing, but his eyes becoming cold and sharp. He looked at her like she was a small inconvenience, like a gnat buzzing in his ear. "And you are?" "I'm a botanist," she said, her voice gaining a little bit of confidence as she spoke about her work. "I'm here on a research grant. The ecosystem here is incredibly fragile. You can't build a resort. It would destroy everything." He laughed, a small, humorless sound. "Miss Botanist, I'm not interested in your plants. I'm interested in progress. This island has been left to rot for too long. We're going to give it a fresh start. We're going to make it into something worth a fortune." He spoke with an easy arrogance, like he was a king who had arrived to claim his kingdom. Katie felt a surge of anger. He didn't see the island's beauty, didn't feel the quiet power that pulsed from it. All he saw was money. "You're not listening to me," she said, her voice rising. "This place is more than just land. It's special." Damien's eyes, the color of a stormy sea, seemed to flash with a strange, dark light for a split second. He leaned closer and the smooth, professional mask he wore slipped just for a moment. "Special, you say?" he asked, his voice now a low, dangerous whisper. I know exactly how special it is. And I know what it took from my family. I know about the spring at the heart of the island. And I'm going to tear it out from the roots. His words hit her like a punch to the stomach. He knew about the spring, the place that felt so ancient and sacred, the source of the island's strange magic. She had no idea what he meant by it taking something from his family, but she didn't like the sound of it one bit. It sounded like he wanted revenge. Just then a voice, deep and calm, cut through the tension. Leave her alone, Mercer. Katie turned and saw JT standing at the edge of the pier. He wasn't dressed for a confrontation, just his usual worn clothes, but his presence was a physical thing. He stood still and powerful, like a mountain that wouldn't be moved. The locals who had been watching seemed to relax a little, a collective sigh of relief passing through them. Damien's smile dropped, replaced by a sneer. Julian Thayer. The island's little protector. Still guarding your little treasure, are you? JT didn't answer. He just held Damien's gaze, and in that silent stare, Katie saw a whole history of ancient hatred. The air between them felt thick and heavy, like the seconds before a lightning strike. She knew with a certainty that went beyond words, that these two men were more than just a developer and a local. They were from two different worlds, and their worlds were about to collide. I'm here to get what's owed to my family, Damien said, his voice now a low hiss. 100 years of a curse gone. And all I have to do is break your little spring. Katie's mind reeled. A curse? What was he talking about? Her family, the O'Connells, she knew nothing about werewolves or curses. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but the look in his eyes was anything but a fairy tale. JT took a step forward, his voice a low rumble. You will not touch the spring. Oh, I think I will, Damien said, his smile returning, a cruel, triumphant thing. He looked at Katie, then back at JT, a cold glint in his eye. In fact, I think I have a new plan. This little botanist of yours. She might just be the key. The implication hung in the air, a silent threat. He saw a way to hurt JT, a way to get what he wanted by using her. Katie felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't just a random botanist anymore. She was now a pawn in a game she didn't understand, a game with a history that went back a century. She had stumbled into a war, and the first shot had just been fired. JT seemed to read her fear. His jaw tightened and his whole body seemed to tense up. Leave her out of this. I'm afraid that's not an option, Damien said, his voice soft, almost friendly. She's the reason this island is so special after all. She's the living embodiment of my lost power. I'll see you soon, Julian. He turned and walked away, his team following behind him, leaving a silence in their wake that was heavier than the noisy arrival. Katie stood there, her legs feeling weak. The island, which had been her peaceful escape, now felt like a battlefield. She looked at JT, his face a grim mask of resolve. He was no longer just the mysterious watcher in the woods. He was a man with a secret, a man who was now willing to stand in front of her to protect her from a threat she didn't fully understand. She had a feeling she was about to get a crash course in the kind of island history that wasn't written in any textbook. Chapter 4. The silence left by Damien Mercer's departure was not one of peace, but of a held breath. The air on the pier was heavy with his threats, and Katie felt a shiver of fear run down her spine. The island, which had been her refuge, now felt like a battlefield, and she was standing right in the middle of it. She looked at JT, his face a grim mask of resolve. He was no longer the silent shadow in the woods. He was a man with a purpose, and for the first time he was looking directly at her, not at the trees behind her. He's serious, Jay said, his voice a low rumble. He'll be back, and he'll bring more people with him. Katie nodded, her mind spinning. He talked about a curse in his family. What was he talking about? JT didn't answer right away. He looked out at the water, his jaw tight. He was wrestling with something, a war between his desire to protect his family's secrets and his need to protect the island. Finally he turned back to her, his gaze intense. It's a long story. A stupid one. He took a deep breath. The short version is that my family has been the island's guardians for a very long time. We're bound to it. And his family, they were bound to something else, something they lost. He thinks if he destroys the spring he can get it back. The spring? Katie asked, the fear in her stomach growing. She knew the spring. It was in the oldest part of the forest, a place of deep quiet and ancient power. It felt like the heart of the island. It's not just water, JT said, his voice softer now. It's the source of the island's magic. It's what connects us to this place. If he destroys it, he destroys us. And everything else. Katie looked at him, her heart going out to him. This wasn't just a business deal for him. It was his home, his family, his entire identity. She felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her. This was her home now too. So what do we do? She asked. She wasn't a fighter, but she was smart and she was determined. JT looked at her, his eyes searching hers as if trying to figure out if she was truly in this with him. He seemed to find what he was looking for. We have to work together. You know the plants, the land. You can find places his people can't. You can see things they don't. We have to survey the area around the spring, find the weak spots and figure out a way to protect it. We have to beat him at his own game. And just like that, an unlikely alliance was formed. The next few days were a strange, tense dance. They spent hours in the forest together, a man of quiet power and a woman of science. JT was a creature of the wild, moving through the trees with a silent grace. He knew every path, every hidden hollow, every secret the island held. Katie, on the other hand, was clumsy and a little loud, her boots crunching on the fallen leaves. She tried to be quiet, but it was like her body just wasn't made for silent movement. One afternoon she was trying to get a soil sample from a steep bank when her feet slipped on some loose rocks. She yelped as she started to slide, her bag of equipment clattering. Before she knew what was happening, JT's hand shot out and grabbed her arm, his grip strong and steady. He pulled her back up with an easy strength, his face impassive. "Thank you," she said, her cheeks flushed. He felt a little silly. "Be more careful," he said, his voice a little gruff. She just nodded, trying to hide a small, embarrassed smile. This was the most they had talked to each other in a while, and it was about her almost falling down a hill. It was a funny, simple moment in a world that was suddenly a lot more complicated. As they worked, their conversations slowly shifted. They started with logistics, how to mark the areas without being seen, what tools they would need. But then as the day wore on, they began to talk about other things. "You know, for a man who lives in the woods, you sure don't know anything about flora," Katie said with a teasing grin as she pointed to a small plant. "This is a trillium. It's a perennial herb." JT looked at it, then at her. "It's just a plant." "Oh, it's never just a plant," she said, her eyes shining with her passion. "Plants have stories. They tell you about the soil, about the history of a place. They're like living maps." She spent a good 5 minutes explaining the importance of the plant, and JT listened with a quiet patience that surprised her. He didn't interrupt. He just watched her, a small, thoughtful frown on his face. In return, he began to share little pieces of the island's history. He didn't talk about curses or ancient feuds, he talked about the land itself. "My family, we've always known where to find water. We know when a storm is coming. The island talks to us. We listen." He was telling her about the island's deep connection to his family, a quiet, simple truth. Katie realized that he was just a man with a heavy burden, a man who saw the world in a way she never could, but who loved the same thing she did. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery colors, they were packing up their gear. They had found survey markers from Damien's team, small orange flags tied to trees. The threat was real. "He won't stop," Jay said, his voice low. "He's desperate. His family lost something a long time ago. Something they want back more than anything." "What did they lose?" Katie asked, her voice soft. JT shook his head. "It's a long story. It doesn't matter. What matters is that he thinks destroying the spring will make him whole again. It won't. It will just destroy everything." She could feel the pain in his voice. This wasn't just an old story to him. It was a part of who he was. They walked in a comfortable silence for a while, the tension of their mission now replaced by the growing warmth between them. When they got to a fork in the path, JT stopped and looked at her. "You're good at this," he said simply. "You're not afraid of the forest." "Not really." Katie laughed. "Well, I've had a good teacher. You know, the silent kind." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a rare and startling thing that transformed his face. "Come on," he said, nodding toward her cabin. "It's getting dark." He walked with her all the way to her porch. The feeling of him by her side was a comfort she hadn't realized she needed. She was no longer alone on the island. When they reached her door, he didn't leave right away. He just stood there for a moment, and in the low light of the porch, she could see the silent conversation happening in his eyes. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't find the words. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet. "I'll be back tomorrow morning. We have more work to do." Katie nodded, a small, genuine smile on her face. "I'll be ready." He turned and melted back into the shadows of the trees, a silent watcher once more. But this time she knew he wasn't just watching from a distance. He was a protector, an ally, and something more. The alliance was formed, built not on magic or ancient feuds, but on a shared love for a simple, beautiful island and a mutual respect that was just beginning to grow into something much, much deeper. Chapter 5. The past 2 weeks had settled into a rhythm, a strange and peaceful routine in the middle of a brewing war. Katie and JT were a team now. The initial tension of their alliance had faded, replaced by a comfortable, easy silence. They moved through the forest with a shared purpose, mapping out the areas around the spring and looking for signs of Damien's crew. They talked about plants, about the weather, about the best way to make a fire without matches. One afternoon they sat on a mossy rock, sharing a simple lunch of sandwiches and apples. Katie took a big bite of her sandwich, and a small laugh escaped her when she saw that JT was peeling his apple with a small, sharp knife, making a perfect, unbroken spiral of skin. It was such a small, meticulous thing for a man who seemed to belong to the wild, and it was the kind of detail that made him feel real. "What?" he asked, a small frown on his face. "Nothing," she said, her smile genuine. "Just, you're very particular about your apples." A hint of a smile, a rare and startling thing, touched his lips. "It's how my grandfather taught me. It's about patience." She looked at her own apple, which she had simply bitten into with no care at all. Her life was more about action than patience. The contrast was funny, and it made her feel a sudden, deep warmth. She was starting to like this quiet man with the intense eyes, the man who was so at peace with the world, yet so burdened by its secrets. As they worked, Katie found herself noticing things that went beyond her scientific training. She was kneeling by a patch of a rare luminous moss she was studying, a plant so delicate it seemed to almost breathe. She reached out her hand to touch it, and for a fleeting second, it felt as if the moss was leaning into her touch. The glowing green seemed to pulse, getting brighter just under her fingertips. She quickly pulled her hand back, her heart doing a strange little leap. She shook her head, telling herself it was just a trick of the light. But a few days later it happened again. They were deep in the forest, near the heart of the spring. The air here was different. It was heavy and thick, with a strange, clean smell she couldn't place. Katie was taking a measurement when she stumbled and almost fell. JT, who was standing a few feet away, reached out to steady her, his hand lightly touching her arm. The moment their skin made contact, a strange, powerful jolt went through her body. It wasn't an electric shock. It was a warm, vibrant tingling that started in her arm and spread through her veins, making her feel alive in a way she never had before. It felt like every cell in her body was humming a low, happy song. She pulled her arm away, her eyes wide. "What was that?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. JT's face was unreadable. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, and she could see a flicker of something in his eyes, a look she couldn't place. It was a mixture of awe and fear. She tried to laugh it off. "Must be the static electricity. My hair gets really wild on days like this." He just nodded, but he didn't look convinced. And for the rest of the day she was acutely aware of his presence and the strange, vibrant tingling that came with it. It was like her body was a tuning fork and he was the sound that made it hum. That evening, as they were making their way back to her cabin, they took a small detour to check on a section of the forest where the plants seemed particularly resilient. They were talking about a new, funny rumor from town about Damien's team. Apparently, one of his fancy surveyors had tried to get to the spring and had ended up covered in mud and complaining about aggressive foliage. Katie laughed, a full, genuine sound that bounced through the trees. Aggressive foliage. I love that. The island's fighting back on its own. She felt a surge of joy, a feeling of pure, unadulterated happiness. This simple life, this shared purpose, this quiet man by her side. It felt right. As they walked, she stumbled over a rock, her foot landing on a patch of bare, dead earth. A small, defeated sigh left her lips. She had been so happy, and now she had broken the flow, interrupted the peace. She felt a pang of sadness. But then as she lifted her foot she stopped dead in her tracks. From the patch of dead, barren soil where her foot had just been, a tiny green shoot was pushing its way out of the ground. It was an impossible, miraculous thing. It was growing right before her eyes, its vibrant green a stark contrast to the dirt around it. And on top of the tiny shoot, a small, perfect bud was already forming, its petals a soft, pale pink. Katie stared at it, her mind a whirlwind. It wasn't possible. She hadn't planted anything. She hadn't done anything. But she knew with a certainty that went beyond her scientific training, that she had been the cause. The joy, the sudden, overwhelming happiness she had felt had been too strong. It had bled from her, and it had made something beautiful and living grow where nothing had been before. She looked up at JT, her eyes wide with a mix of wonder and disbelief. Did you see that? He was looking at the plant, his face a perfect mask of quiet shock. He saw it. He knew exactly what had happened. She saw the fear return to his eyes, a cold, painful wave that seemed to wash over him. But this time it wasn't just fear of an outside threat. It was a fear that was directed at her. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the plant, then at her, and then his face hardened into the familiar mask of a man who was burdened by a truth he couldn't share. He looked at her not as an ally but as a problem. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving her standing there alone with a tiny, impossible plant growing at her feet. She stood there for a long time looking at the tiny plant and the quiet, empty space where JT had been. She had felt her first glimmer of magic, a true and living thing, and it had scared the man she was just beginning to trust. The island wasn't just a place of quiet beauty. It was a place of secrets, and she was starting to realize that one of those secrets was herself. Chapter 6. The next morning, the tiny, impossible plant on the forest floor had already grown, its pale pink petals unfurling in the early light. Katie knelt beside it, her hands trembling slightly as she touched one of the delicate leaves. It was real. The magic was real. And so was the fact that it had made JT run away. She had spent the night staring at the ceiling of her cabin, replaying the last few minutes of the day before. The look in his eyes, that mixture of fear and awe and something else, something she didn't recognize, something cold. He hadn't just been a silent watcher. He had been a protector, and now it seemed she was something he needed to be protected from. The thought was a sharp pain in her chest. She spent the next 2 days trying to find him. She went to all the spots they had mapped together, calling his name softly. She left a note on the porch of his cabin, a simple, "Are you okay? I'm worried." But the note was still there the next day, untouched. The island, which had felt like a friend, now felt vast and empty. His absence was a heavy weight, a silence that felt louder than any words. She felt lonely in a way she hadn't felt since she left the city, and her scientific mind, so used to logic and reason, had nothing to say about it. On the morning of the third day, a familiar sound filled the air. It was the loud, angry buzz of Damian Mercer's speedboat, and it brought a new kind of dread with it. He wasn't just back, he was bringing more people. She saw them from her cabin window, a small army of men in crisp, new jackets, carrying surveyor's equipment. The silence of the island was officially gone. Katie went down to the harbor, a fierce protectiveness bubbling up inside her. She was a botanist, not a fighter, but she couldn't just stand by and watch them ruin this place. She found Damien near the docks, giving orders to his team. He looked even more confident than before, his smile a cold, triumphant thing. He saw her and his smile widened, a practiced fake warmth filling his eyes. "Well, if it isn't the island's little protector," he said, his voice smooth and friendly. "All alone? Where's your silent guardian? Did he leave you to fight this battle on your own?" The words were like a small, sharp knife to her heart. He knew. He knew that JT was gone. He must have been watching her too, just waiting for the right moment. "He's busy," she said, her voice trying to sound confident but a little shaky. "You can't do this, Mr. Mercer. The spring is a living thing. You can't just destroy it." Damien laughed, a low, easy sound. "Living? My dear, you're a scientist. You don't believe in fairy tales, do you? But you're right about one thing. He's not here. And I know why." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper meant only for her ears. "I know about the spring, and I know about you. You're an O'Connell. Your family and my family are from the same line. The line that was cursed." Katie took a step back, her mind reeling. The name. O'Connell. Her mother's words about her O'Connell hands echoed in her mind. It couldn't be. It was crazy. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice a whisper. Damien smiled, a sad, knowing expression on his face. We were cursed a long time ago. Robbed of our true nature. Robbed of our power. I can't shift. I can't be what I'm supposed to be. All because of a vengeful magic and a family that holds the key. He nodded toward the heart of the island. The Fitzwilliams. Julian Thayer's family. He held out his hand, his palm open. But I saw what you did the other day. I felt the magic. I knew it was our power finally waking up. You are the key. You are the one who is supposed to break the curse. The living embodiment of our lost power. She looked from him to the distant trees, to the spot where JT had disappeared. A terrible thought, a cold fear settled over her. Was that why he ran? Because he saw her magic and knew what it meant? Was it a threat to him? Damien seemed to read her thoughts. Don't you see? He's a Fitzwilliam. He's a guardian. He's bound to the island. He's been living in fear of the day our curse would break. He saw what you can do and he ran. He knows that if our power returns, his family's hold on this island is over. He doesn't want you, Katie. He wants the island. The words were a brutal punch to the gut. They made sense in a horrible, gut-wrenching way. The man who had been her silent guardian, her quiet protector, was now a person with a hidden agenda. He had been watching her because he knew who she was, a descendant of his family's greatest enemy. He had been pretending to care, to keep an eye on her, to keep her close, to control her. Damien, seeing the pain and confusion on her face, put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Come with me, Katie. You don't belong here with him. You belong with your own kind. You deserve to be free, to be powerful. Join me. We can get our power back together. We can finally live as we were meant to. He offered her a world of power, of belonging, of finally understanding who she was. He was offering her a truth that, while terrifying, made perfect sense. The pieces of the puzzle, from her mother's words to the strange tingling she felt, were all coming together. And they all pointed to the same thing. JT had lied to her. He had a secret and he had used her for his own purposes. Katie looked at Damien's outstretched hand, and then at the dark, silent forest where JT was hiding. She was faced with an impossible choice. Fight for the man she was just starting to love and the island that had become her home, or join her own kind and embrace a heritage she never knew she had. The first battle was a test of loyalty, and she had to decide right now which side she was on. Chapter 7. The world seemed to shrink to a single point, Damien's outstretched hand. It was a perfectly manicured hand, a symbol of the world he was offering her. A world of power, of belonging, of finally understanding who she was. The air between them was thick with his words, his promises, his version of the truth. He painted a picture of a life that made perfect, terrifying sense. A life where her own kind had been wronged, and a man who was burdened by a curse was the one who could set her free. Katie stared at his hand, her mind racing. Every word he spoke, every argument he made, felt like a cold and logical assault on the fragile trust she had been building with JT. JT's silence, his sudden disappearance, his fear of her magic. It all made a terrible kind of sense. He hadn't been watching her for her sake. He had been watching her for his own. Katie, Damien said, his voice soft as if he were talking to a frightened child. Don't you see? He's a lie. Everything he's told you is a half-truth. He's not a guardian, he's a jailer. He's been keeping the spring and our power locked up for generations. She felt a wave of nausea. Could it all be a lie? Was she truly alone? Just as she was about to pull away, to turn and run and just be a botanist again, a voice cut through the tension. A voice she hadn't heard in days, a voice she had been desperate to hear. Get away from her, Mercer. JT emerged from the trees, not with a flourish or a grand entrance, but with a quiet, solid presence that instantly changed everything. He walked toward them, his boots making a soft sound on the dirt. There was no anger on his face, only a cold, hard resolve. His eyes, fixed on Damien, were a living shield, a wall of pure, quiet power. Damien's practiced smile dropped, replaced by a cruel sneer. The silent guardian speaks. Got tired of hiding in the woods, Julian? JT didn't dignify the taunt with a response. He came to a stop beside Katie, his body a silent promise of protection. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical thing, a silent claim that put a barrier between her and Damien. "You're a coward," Damien said, his voice now a low hiss. "You saw her magic and you ran. You were scared. You're a keeper of a lie, Julian. You're a shell of a man and you know it." Katie flinched, remembering the look on JT's face when he had seen the magic. He hadn't just been afraid, he had been pained. JT finally turned his head to look at her, and his gaze was more intense and honest than anything Damien had said. "I wasn't scared of you," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I was scared for you." His words hit her like a punch. "He told me you just want to protect the island," she said, her voice small. "That you were just using me." "My family's been protecting this island for 100 years, JT said, his gaze not leaving hers. "It's all I've ever known. It's my home. I wasn't just using you. I was trying to protect you from the curse you don't even know you carry. I was scared of what it would mean for you." He didn't make any grand promises. He just gave her the quiet, uncomfortable truth. He was a man with a secret, a man who had been burdened by his family's legacy. He hadn't been running away from her. He had been running from the truth, from the fear of what his family's ancient enemy awakening her power could mean for her. He hadn't wanted to drag her into a fight that wasn't hers. But Damien's arrival had made that impossible. Damien, seeing the shift in Katie's face, laughed. "A pathetic little love story. Don't be a fool, Katie. Look at him. He's a coward. I'm a man who will give you back what you lost. What you were born to have." He stepped closer, his face a mask of false sympathy. "He's afraid of you. I'm the only one who can understand you. He's a keeper and you're a prisoner." JT's jaw tightened. "She's not a prisoner." "She is now," Damien said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "She's a living testament to a power I can finally take back. You can join me, Katie. We can be free together. We can embrace our true nature, a nature he has never known and can never understand." Katie looked from one man to the other, her mind reeling. One was offering her a future of power and freedom, a future with her own kind. The other was offering her a quiet, burdened existence, a life of protecting a cursed island. But she had seen the pain in JT's eyes. She had seen the truth in his words. She had felt his quiet strength and his honesty. Damien was offering her a deal, a trade, but JT was offering her something more. A fight. A fight for the island, for her new home, and for a bond that had been built on trust, not lies. The choice was no longer about family or power. It was about heart. "I'm not a thing to be claimed or taken," Katie said, her voice shaking slightly, but with a new kind of strength. "And this island isn't a prize to be won." She looked at JT, and the silent understanding that passed between them was more powerful than any words. "I'm with him. I'm with the island." Damien's face went from charming to furious in a split second. The mask of a kind businessman dropped, and the true face of a desperate, defeated man appeared. He let out a low, frustrated growl. "You'll regret this," he snarled. He lunged at JT, his fist clenched. JT didn't flinch. He met the attack head-on, his movements fluid and precise, a silent, powerful force against Damien's wild fury. The two men clashed, a quick, brutal battle of wills. Damien fought with a desperate, animalistic rage, but JT's power was a quiet, steady force, a part of the earth itself. He didn't just fight, he was the resistance. The fight was over as quickly as it began. With a single, powerful move, JT disarmed Damien and held him in a tight grip. "Get off my island," JT said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. Damien, defeated and humiliated, pulled away, his eyes full of a simmering, vengeful hatred. He looked at Katie, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "You might have won the first round, Julian, but this isn't over. Not until I have what's mine. And not until she realizes who she really is." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods with his team, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Katie stood there, her heart still pounding. She looked at JT, who was standing still, his body still coiled with tension. She had made her choice, and it had been the right one. She had stood by the man she was just starting to love, and in doing so she had chosen the island and a future she had never imagined. A future that was no longer about her plants, but about love, family, and a war that was only just beginning. Chapter 8. The silence that settled over the island after Damien and his men left was different this time. It wasn't the silence of a secret or a mystery. It was the quiet of two people who had just chosen each other in a world that was suddenly a lot more dangerous. Katie looked at JT and he looked back, his eyes finally free of the shadows that had haunted them. He was a man with a heavy burden, but in that moment he was just a man who was relieved to be with her. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little choked up. For not running." "I could never run from you," he said, his voice quiet. He looked at the spot where the tiny, impossible plant had grown. "I was a fool. I saw the magic and I panicked. My family's story, it's been a long one. We've been told for 100 years that the O'Connells are our enemies, the ones who took everything from us. When I saw your magic, I didn't know what to think." He took a deep breath and for the first time he started to tell her the whole truth. "He's right about one thing. Our families are cursed. My family is bound to the island. His family, they can't shift. They can't be what they're supposed to be." Katie listened, her mind racing. It was an impossible story, a fairy tale from a book, but after what she had seen and what she had felt, she knew it was all true. She was a descendant of werewolves, a creature of the wild, and she had never even known it. The tingling in her veins, the way the plants responded to her, the sheer strangeness of her life, it all made a terrible kind of sense now. She looked at JT again and she saw not a cold, apathetic guardian, but a man who had been a prisoner of his family's past, a man who had chosen to be with her despite everything he had been taught to believe. The love she had for him, a feeling that had been a quiet ember in her heart, now flared into a warm, powerful flame. Their peace didn't last long. The next morning, the angry buzz of a chainsaw cut through the air. It wasn't just Damien's team anymore. It was a full-on construction crew. They were moving in on the spring, their machines a monstrous, metallic army tearing through the peaceful woods. JT went cold. "He's not just a liar," he said, his voice a low growl. "He's desperate. He's trying to do it now before we can stop him." They ran through the trees, their hearts pounding in unison. When they reached the spring, the scene was one of pure chaos. Damien was there, his face a mask of furious determination, shouting orders to his men. They were setting up equipment, the loud, angry engines of their machines drowning out the gentle bubbling of the spring. "Stop!" Katie yelled, her voice breaking a little. "You can't do this. You'll destroy everything." Damien laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "It's already been destroyed, little botanist. I'm just cleaning up the mess and reclaiming what's mine." He looked at JT, his eyes filled with pure hatred. "This is it, Julian. Your family's little paradise is about to be mine. And so is my power." JT didn't waste time talking. He was a guardian and he would fight like one. He raised his hands, his eyes closed in fierce concentration, and the ground beneath the bulldozers began to tremble. Rocks flew from the earth, and the very soil seemed to rise up and push back against the machines, a silent, powerful resistance. The ground rippled and groaned, and the men operating the machines looked at each other, their faces filled with confusion and fear. But Damien was not just a businessman. He was a man with a mission. He lunged at JT, his movements quick and brutal. JT was a warrior, but he was alone against a man who was fueled by a century of vengeance. Damien's fist connected with JT's jaw and JT went down hard, hitting his head on a rock. He fell to the ground, his eyes closed, the magical power he was channeling flickering and dying. "No!" Katie screamed. She ran to him, her heart in her throat. She knelt by his side, her hands on his face, her mind a whirlwind of fear and pain. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. He had fought for her and for the island, and now he was going to die. Damien stood over them, a triumphant, cruel smile on his face. "Look at him," he said to Katie. "Your precious guardian is broken. Now step aside." Katie looked at JT's still form, at the blood on his temple. A rage, fierce and raw, rose from her heart. It wasn't just a simple anger. It was a pure, white-hot fury that she had never felt before. It was a fury that came from a place deep inside her, from a part of her that had been sleeping for 100 years. Her love for JT, her fear of losing him, her fierce protectiveness for the island, it all welled up inside her, a powerful, unstoppable force. A tingling, a feeling she now knew was magic, began to course through her veins. It wasn't a soft, warm feeling this time. It was a violent, painful surge of power. It felt like every bone in her body was breaking and reforming all at once. She let out a scream, a guttural, terrifying sound that was not human. Her body began to change, her bones shifting and cracking. The pain was unbearable, a searing fire that consumed her. She fell to her hands and knees, her clothes tearing as her body grew and changed, her skin covered in a thick, coarse fur. Damien stared in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not yet. Not like this. And then with a final sickening crack, the change was complete. Katie, no longer a woman but a massive silver-furred werewolf, stood over JT's still form. Her eyes, filled with a primal protective rage, were fixed on Damien. In that moment, a powerful wave of magic, a silent, beautiful wave of energy, rippled out from her, washing over the entire island. It felt like 100 years of pain and sorrow were being washed away, a curse being lifted, a family finally being set free. All across the world, dormant O'Connells felt a surge of power in their veins, a feeling that was both terrifying and utterly beautifully right. The curse was broken. Katie looked down at her massive, powerful paws, at her fur, and at her love, who lay still on the ground. She was no longer just a botanist. She was a werewolf. And she was going to fight for the man she loved, for the island that was her home, and for a heritage she had just discovered. The final battle had begun, and she was more ready than she had ever been. Chapter 9. The world, which had always felt so real and solid, was now a whirlwind of new sensations. Katie's body, now a powerful silver-furred werewolf, was a symphony of smells and sounds she had never known. The scent of pine and salt was 1,000 times stronger, and she could hear the distant cry of a gull on the wind, a sound that was 1,000,000 miles away from the chaos around her. Her mind, however, was still her own, a jumble of fear and confusion and a primal, fierce need to protect. She looked down at JT, who was lying still on the ground, a thin trail of blood on his temple. A low, protective growl rumbled in her chest, a sound that was both terrifying and completely natural. She stood over him, her powerful body a shield, her eyes locked on Damien and his men, who were staring at her in stunned silence. The curse was broken. The feeling of that release was a tangible thing, a powerful wave of energy that had sent a silent, beautiful ripple across the island. The men, their machines silent, looked at her as if she were a ghost, a living legend from a fairy tale. Damien, however, was not afraid. He was in awe. His eyes, fixed on her, were not filled with fear, but with a triumphant, crazed joy. He had lost the battle, but he had won the war. His power was back. His heritage was real. And the woman who stood before him, the living embodiment of his lost freedom, was the key to everything. He waved his men back, his face a perfect mask of control. "Everyone stand down," he commanded, his voice a low, excited whisper. He took a few steps closer to her, his hands raised in a show of peace. "Katie," he said, his voice now a smooth, persuasive thing. "Look at you. Look at what you've become. This is your true nature. This is what you were always meant to be." Katie stood her ground, her body coiled with a silent, primal fury. He had hurt JT. He had threatened the island. But his words, they resonated with a deep, forgotten part of her soul. She could feel the power of her new form, a pure, wild thing that felt more right than anything she had ever known. "This is not a curse," Damien said, his voice soft, almost intimate. "This is a gift. A gift that you can now share with all of us. You've set us free, Katie. You've brought our family back from the brink of extinction. We have our power back because of you." He took another step closer, his eyes pleading, his voice filled with a desperate sincerity. He said, nodding toward JT, "is your enemy. His family has been keeping us from our true nature for a century. He's a guardian, a jailer. He's not one of us. But I am. We are. This is your family. This is your heritage. This is who you were born to be. Don't let your heart trick you into staying on this island, a place that has only brought you pain and sorrow. Come with me. Embrace who you are. Embrace your own kind." His words were a beautiful, insidious poison. They offered her a sense of belonging she had never had. A family she never knew. A world of power and freedom she could only have dreamed of. She was a scientist, a practical woman, but she was also a werewolf now. A part of her was drawn to his words, a deep, instinctual pull that felt like coming home. A groan from the ground broke her focus. JT was stirring. He slowly opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was her. He didn't see a monster. He didn't see a beast. He saw her. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a small, grateful thing. His hand, still covered in mud, reached out to her, and his eyes were a quiet promise of love and acceptance. He wasn't afraid. He was just there. For her. See, Damien said, his voice filled with a fake, cruel triumph. He is your enemy. He is a Fitzwilliam. He'll use you. He'll bind you to this island forever, a prisoner of a family who hates you. I, on the other hand, am a leader. I will give you a family and a future. My offer stands, Katie. Join your own kind. Join me and we will finally be free. Katie's mind was a battlefield. One side was a century of hatred and a promise of power. It was her bloodline, a siren call to a heritage she never knew she had. It was a man offering her a future with her own kind. The other side was a man lying bruised and battered on the ground, a man who had been a silent guardian, a protector, a man who had chosen to stand with her despite everything he had been taught to believe. He was not her blood, but he was her heart. She looked at Damien, his face a mask of smooth, calculating charm. Then she looked at JT, his face a mask of pain, his eyes a quiet promise. She was now a part of two worlds, two families, and she was faced with an impossible choice. Was she a child of an ancient curse, or a woman who could make her own destiny? Damien, seeing her indecision, knew he had to let her think. He had said all he could. The rest was up to her. I will give you some time to think, he said, his voice cold and final. We will be back for you, my queen. He gave a sharp order, and his men, now a silent, defeated team, followed him away, leaving her standing over the injured JT. Katie was alone. In her new wolf form, with the power of her family surging through her veins, she was alone. The magical spring bubbled gently and the wind whispered through the trees. The island was hers. But she had to choose. Fight for the man she loved and the island that had become her home, or join her own kind and embrace a heritage she never knew she had. The climax was coming. A battle between her own bloodline and her true heart. The weight of 100 years of curses was on her shoulders and she had to decide. Chapter 10. Katie looked at JT, her heart pounding with a fierce, protective love. The choice was no longer a question of her past or her future. It was a simple, undeniable fact. She had found a home not just in this place but in the man lying bruised on the ground. Her bloodline was a part of her, yes, but it was not her master. Her heart was. With a low, determined growl, she made her choice. She was not leaving. She stood over him, her massive silver body a living shield, and turned to face the returning threat. Damien and his men were back, but this time, there was no charm or negotiation. Damien's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He had seen his final hope, his last chance at power, slip through his fingers. He had come to take it back. You've made your choice, Damien snarled, his eyes fixed on her. And now you'll pay for it. But Katie didn't flinch. Her love for JT and this island was a fierce, powerful thing that burned brighter than any rage. He was no longer just a botanist. She was a werewolf and she was going to fight like one. The battle began with a roar. Damien's men, a small army of contractors with no idea what they were up against, charged toward her, their faces filled with confusion. But Katie moved with a speed and grace she never knew she had. She was a silver blur of fur and muscle, her movements a beautiful, terrifying dance of defense. She didn't hurt them, but she knocked them down, her powerful body a force of nature. She was a protector, not a killer, and her movements were driven by an instinct to defend, not to destroy. Damien, seeing that his men were useless against her, lunged forward. His movements were animalistic and wild, fueled by a century of suppressed fury. He was a man who had been a prisoner of a curse his whole life, and he was finally ready to unleash the beast he had kept locked inside. But he wasn't the only one with a fight left in him. JD, still on the ground, slowly opened his eyes. He saw Katie, her powerful wolf form, defending him. He didn't feel fear. He felt a profound sense of awe and a love so deep it ached. He was no longer a lone guardian. He was a partner. With a groan, JT began to move. He was still hurt, but he was not out of the fight. He used his elemental power not to attack but to help. The ground beneath Damien's feet trembled and shifted, throwing him off balance. The air around them grew thick with a gentle, disorienting fog, confusing Damien's men. JT was a quiet, steady force, a part of the island itself, and he was fighting with a power that came from love, not from hatred. Katie fought with a primal ferocity, but her mind was clear. She wasn't just a werewolf. She was a botanist who knew every inch of this land. She used her knowledge of the trees and rocks to her advantage, moving with a fluid, natural grace that Damien couldn't match. Her power was a blend of two worlds, of her old self and her new one, of science and magic, of her love for the island and her love for JT. Damien, blinded by his hatred, fought with a desperate, wild fury. He was a feral beast, but Katie was a powerful, controlled warrior. He lunged at her, his eyes wild with rage. But Katie was ready. With a single, powerful move, she used her body to pin him to the ground, her gaze unyielding. She didn't bite. She didn't growl. She just held him, her sheer size and power a silent, undeniable force. "You lose," she said, her voice a low rumble, her words somehow clear and understandable. "You lost because you came here for vengeance. I came here for love." Damien stared up at her, his eyes wide with a painful, dawning realization. The curse was broken. The power was back. But he hadn't been the one to break it. A love-born union, a love that was pure and true, had done what a century of hatred could not. He had been so obsessed with getting his power back that he had never once considered the true meaning of the curse, the only way it could be broken. He was a man who was finally free, but he was also a man who was completely, utterly alone. The rage drained from his face, replaced by a deep, hollow despair. He had lost. With a final, heartbroken sigh, he gave a sharp nod, and his men, seeing the look in his eyes, turned and walked away. The silence that settled over the island was a beautiful, peaceful thing. The war was over. The curses were broken. The island was safe. Katie, her body still in wolf form, slowly turned and walked to JT. She nudged his shoulder gently with her nose, and he reached out a hand, his fingers tangled in her fur. He was hurt, but he was safe. She lay her head beside his, a low, contented purr rumbling in her chest. She had a new body, a new family, and a new life. And she was a part of it all because of a simple, impossible act of love. She had chosen her heart, and in doing so she had saved them all. Epilogue. The silence that settled over the island was a new kind of quiet. It was not the silence of a secret or a mystery. It was the silence of peace, a beautiful calm that washed over the trees, the cliffs, and the magical spring that bubbled gently in the heart of the forest. The curses were broken. The hatred was gone. The island was finally free. Katie, now a werewolf, found herself in a world that was both familiar and brand new. Her senses were sharp, her body was a powerful, graceful thing, and for the first time in her life she felt truly whole. She was no longer just a botanist. She was a guardian, a protector, a part of a heritage she had just begun to understand. And she wasn't alone. JT, his injuries healing, was by her side. His face, once so guarded and burdened, now held a light she had never seen before. He was no longer a prisoner of his family's legacy. He was a man who had been freed by love. They sat on the cliffs, watching the sun set over the ocean, their hands clasped together. Their story was no longer just about curses and hatred. It was about two people from two different worlds who found each other and in doing so changed everything. The O'Connells and the Fitzwilliams, two families who had been enemies for generations, were finally at peace. The love-born union on the island had done what a century of hatred and 100 years of pain could not. The ancient curse was gone, and with it the burden of a long, pointless war. In the end, it was not an army or a grand act of vengeance that saved them. It was a single, powerful act of love. It was a simple botanist and a quiet guardian, who, in a world of monsters and magic, found something so much stronger than either. They had found each other. And together they were finally home. And so, as the sun sets on Monhegan Island, casting long shadows over its ancient trees and bubbling spring, Katie and JT's story comes to a beautiful, powerful close. Their journey reminds us that even the oldest curses can be broken by the purest love, and that sometimes the greatest magic lies not in spells, but in the choices we make for our hearts. What do you think? Would you have chosen to embrace your newfound power with Damien, or stand by the quiet guardian JT and fight for love? Let me know in the comments below. Your thoughts, your debates, your arguments, they all help bring these stories to life. If you loved this story of ancient curses, magic, and a love that changed everything, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I've got more captivating paranormal romance stories and exciting new worlds waiting for you right here. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss my next story and comment where you're watching from. Thank you for watching from Monhegan Island with love, and until next time,